and I'll get us started with some opening announcements for our program. So welcome everyone, my name is Noelle and I will be moderating today's Let's Talk program. We love hearing from you around the world. My OCN community has a special guest host with us today, Hank Hanegraaff. You can please use the sidebar chat to share where you're joining from. We like hearing from you. And you can also invite others to join my OCN community. I will put the link to this program in the chat and you'll be able to share it live now or share the recorded video afterward. We are a welcoming community, available any day, anytime, anywhere. So please invite your friends and family to join my OCN community. A few reminders, please be respectful and polite with the opinions of others. Please remain muted when you aren't speaking. And throughout the show, you can share your comments and questions in the sidebar chat. You can also send your questions to me directly if you'd like me to read them for you and remain anonymous. Note that this is a live program being shared on MyOCN Facebook, and it's also being recorded, as I mentioned. We will have it up on myocn.net so you can share it with others after the program. The Orthodox Christian Network is a 501c3 corporation and a 100% donor-supported ministry. I'll just quickly announce our new website once again. We recently launched our new website. It's a better layout for all of our programs, our articles that we publish daily. We publish several articles daily. We have several options for live Christian worship and radio, and we also have live streaming worship from several parishes. So you can find our calendar of events and all those other materials at myocn.net. And without further ado, I will turn things over to Hank Hanegraaff.
Well, thank you, Noelle, and it is a pleasure and it is an honor. And I am very grateful to Father Chris for asking me to sub for him today. Again, my name is Hank Hanegraaff, and I am a guest host trying to fill the shoes of Father Chris. And I'm so grateful that all of you tuned in to OCN Live Let's Talk. This is sort of a megaphone to the world. It's about a couple of things. I think first and foremost, it's about Orthodox advocacy. There are so many people that really don't know what Orthodoxy is. And oftentimes they don't like what they don't know. And so as a mouthpiece for Orthodoxy, people around the world are learning about the treasure chest that envelops Orthodox Christians. But I think this medium is also a poignant tool for Orthodox awakening. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of people that are enveloped in the treasure chest of Orthodoxy that are unaware of the riches in which they have been enveloped. They're like the proverbial fish that's in the water and doesn't recognize the water. And so in a sense, there's a need for a great Orthodox awakening because there are people within Orthodoxy that have become apathetic. There's this malady called apathyism. And there are a lot of Orthodox Christians who are enveloped in that particular malady or problem. We need another iteration of Pentecost. You know, the first iteration of Pentecost was an iteration that can be defined by Peter's sermon. He preached a sermon and 3,000 people came to faith in Christ. And after that, the church began to grow and to multiply. And then midway through the book of Acts, there's the story of Paul, who is being kept by the Holy Spirit from going to Asia. And at night he receives a vision. It's the vision of a Macedonian man who is calling him to come to the Macedonian territories. Well, he heeds the vision. He boards a ship. He goes to Philippi. He meets Lydia. And she becomes the first European convert. As a result of her conversion, we now have Western civilization, the largest mission sending force the history of the world has ever known. But things are changing rapidly, particularly in Western civilization. And I think for purposes of our discussion today, particularly within America, there are so many people who are disengaging from the Christian faith. So many people who are no longer affiliated with the faith once for all delivered to the saints. They become apathetic and have disengaged. And today I want to talk about that pressing problem with one of the premier journalists in the world. His name is Terry Mattingly. He writes the nationally syndicated On Religion column. He is a senior fellow at the Overby Center at the University of Mississippi. He's the founder of the Washington Journalism Center. And there's a whole lot more I could say about him, but he's one of the most interesting people in the world. I mean, if you talk to him for 5 minutes, you realize that this is a man who has varied interests. Let me give you just an example of that. He's a music lover whose interests range from Celtic acoustic guitar to Russian chant. He and his wife, Deborah, have 2 grown children. They're members of St. Anne's Orthodox Church in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And I'm privileged and honored to have him as my guest today. Hi, Terry.
Glad to be here.
You are an interesting human being. First of all, tell me about your interest in music.
Oh gosh, there isn't a single important moment in my life that I cannot tell you the music that goes with it. I've been a serious musician since I was in boys choir at age about 6 and 7, which means I started singing classical music very early in my life. And I would frankly say that my love of beautiful classical choral music was one of the driving forces in my spiritual pilgrimage that led me eventually to Orthodoxy. We can discuss that later, in the context of the subject for the night, but no question about it, that was a large part of my journey to Orthodoxy. However, I began listening to popular music really early for a bizarre reason. My father was a Southern Baptist minister, which in Texas means the preacher's kids don't get to dance, don't get to go to dances or anything. So I would go to the dance and be one of the only people there who was actually paying attention to the music. And when you grow up in a place like Port Arthur, Texas, which has an interesting musical history, I grew up around the corner from Janis Joplin's family. And never met her, but went to school with her brother. But just to give you an idea, 2 friends of mine were the warm-up band for a local rock band that would play Port Arthur at least every other month or something like that. And it was a bunch of suburban guys from Houston who formed a little band called ZZ Top. And of course, they're now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah.
So I got interested in popular music for a completely secondary reason. But by the time I got to Baylor to do my undergraduate work, I had decided I wanted to be a musician, but it's really hard to be a music major if you can't play the piano. So I switched to journalism, figuring maybe I could get a job writing about music. But I should also mention that while at Baylor, both in undergraduate and graduate school, I was a member of Baylor's top touring classical choir. And my dedication to that music, all I can tell you is I was in that choir for 6 years and missed 3 rehearsals in 6 years. That classical music and singing beautiful, sacred choral music has been a very strong part of my life the whole time. So that's a brief musical history. So what else you want to know?
Well, there are a lot of things I want to know about you, and you've piqued my interest in a bunch of areas. First of all, I do want to say that this is a broadcast that we're calling the Orthodox Appeal to Nuns and Duns. So we want to basically define what nuns and duns are. But before we get to that, you piqued my interest in two areas. One is, obviously, you are a well-known journalist, and I think everybody would sort of be interested in knowing what your take is on the state of journalism today.
Oh, mercy. I think that the main thing I could say is that I'm in mourning. MOURNINGS. The internet is really at the heart of all of this. I mean, there's been political biases, and a lot of things have affected journalism for a long time. But part of what has put us in the state we currently are in is that advertising has basically died as a major funder of American journalism, which means you're totally up to whatever money you can make on the internet, and then you need to sell subscriptions. And the way you sell subscriptions is by telling your readers exactly what they want to hear. And this has driven us into an era of open advocacy in the press for the ideas that editors and journalists think will appeal to the consumers of their product. I think the best way to explain it would be to look at television. And all I have to say is MSNBC and Fox News, and you immediately know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. These are two networks whose very existence is to appeal to a certain type of political and cultural person. And this has affected coverage of religion in very negative ways, which we have charted at the website that I've led for 17 years called getreligion.org. And I would urge listeners to check that out.
Getreligion.org.
Right. I mean, last time we checked, there's about 14 million words of commentary at that blog over 17 years. And our purpose is to critique what the mainstream press gets right and gets wrong in coverage of religion. And there's a lot of the latter, because some of the issues that most divide Americans, the so-called culture war issues, and a lot of people use that term in ways that would, the main creator of that term, James Davison Hunter, the sociologist, would be appalled at it. Basically, it's any fights over culture, and in particular, sexual revolution issues. But if you wanted to pick the issues that most divide Americans, they would be like gender, definitions of marriage, as always, abortion. And in each of these issues, you have strong religious content to these debates and issues as well. Yet at the same time, they have become intensely political, which is why every American presidential election is, to one degree or another, about the U.S. Supreme Court and who gets to appoint people to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, we can come back to this, but this is very, very connected to the entire phenomena of the nuns. The people, and the nuns are a very complex group. A friend of mine has written a book called The Nuns, Where They Came From, Who They Are, and Where They're Going. And I did a recent interview with him that can be found on my website, tmat.net. His name is Ryan Berg. He's both a political theorist and an ordained progressive Baptist pastor. But we think of nuns as people with no religion. That's way too simplistic. There are all kinds of people lumped under that term, everyone from atheists and agnostics to people who kind of have the spiritual but not religious crowd. I'm sure you're familiar with that phrase. And at the same time, Berg points out that there is a large group of people that within the nuns that he calls nothing in particulars. These are people that when you ask them about their religion's choice or background, They don't express anything hostile. They just say nothing in particular. And what's interesting about this group of people is they're overwhelmingly blue collar. This is not the more educated clientele of atheism or agnosticism, or some forms of spiritual but not religious, like kind of the New Age movement that I know you've been following closely since the late 80s. This is not that crowd. That's part of the none phenomena, but the nothing in particulars are they're frequently unemployed. They are people who are struggling for hope, and they are not highly educated. They are in pickup trucks and blue collar America, and lots of them are in small towns, small cities, and across the heartland, which is probably not who most Americans think of when they think of liberalism in America. And a lot of these people are frankly not liberals. There's a lot of evidence that Donald Trump, for example, pulled strong support from this nothing in particular crowd. So I jumped ahead of you there, but it came right out of a question you asked.
Yeah, I want to kind of stay with that theme. I was going to ask you about your trek into Orthodoxy, but we can get into that later on. But in one of the articles that I read, you talk about what sociologists are now calling Sheilaism.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of cash that out for us.
Well, that's a term. Now, let me briefly, I opened this up because at my age, I frequently, I don't know about you, but I struggle with memory issues every now and then. Can we confess that? Robert.
We're not even in the same age category. You're in your 50s, I'm in my 70s.
Okay, I'm 67, so I'm closer than you think. Okay, this sociologist's name was Robert N. Bellah, and he wrote a very famous book called Habits of the Heart, which was kind of about trends in American life in the late 70s and into the 80s. And he met this, he kept running into something that he called Sheila, and he called it that because of a woman that he just simply only wants to identify as Sheila. And there's this very famous quote, which I want to read to our listeners. And here's the famous quote. I can't remember the last time I went to church. My faith has carried me a long way. It's Sheilaism, just my own little voice. And she said she thought the goal of life was to love yourself and be gentle with yourself. I think God would want us to take care of each other. Now, if you followed the debates in recent years, I think the term that would be associated with this is therapeutic moralistic deism.
Yeah.
Or moralistic therapy. I get the initials in the wrong order. I think it's moralistic therapeutic deism. And it basically is this: religion should be positive. Religion should never judge anyone else. Religion should just be about loving each other and loving yourself. And God's on your side. Everything's going to be okay. Kind of an I'm okay, you're okay approach to religion. I once was talking, to drop a name, I was once talking to Billy Graham about that phenomena. And he said, the problem is if you go into the pulpit and try to preach, I'm okay, you're okay, you're ignoring the fact that about half the people in the audience are going, I'm not okay. I hate my job. My wife is mad at me. My kids are mad at me. I'm mad at me. I mean, so he said, this leave us alone, moralistic therapeutic deism, this doesn't fit really well with America right now, or the lives that lots of Americans are living, you know, in an era when we're seeing skyrocketing anxiety, loneliness, you know, and other phenomena associated with that, a lot of which I would connect with what is called screen culture. And basically, whereas we used to worry about the contents of cable television and everything, we're now talking about these things. My own priest here in Oak Ridge, a year ago, right weeks before the outbreak of COVID, he had a chance to go to Russia and get to spend a lot of time with Russian Orthodox priests and bishops there. Kind of we're in the OCA, and Russia likes to invite American priests sometimes to come over. Well, he went out of his way, in part because of our conversations. He asked every priest he met in Russia, what is the single greatest challenge in your ministry right now? And he said every one of them, except for one, said smartphones. And he meant by that the unleashed power of the internet in the privacy of people's lives with this thing in their hand. A friend of mine who is a famous newspaper editor in Nigeria, I told him about this. I was exchanging emails with him, and his name is Emeka Azizi. And I told him this story, and Emeka said, that's interesting. He said, because I bet if you ask ministers in Nigeria, what's the number one force that they feel they're up against, the number one challenge to their ministries, he believes they would say the same thing in Nigeria, smartphones. And the smartphone phenomena is directly linked, I believe, to the phenomena of nuns and to people kind of giving up on institutional religion. They can find their own religion with this thing really easily.
Now, we should talk about the sheer magnitude of nuns and duns, the nuns, no religious affiliation, and the duns who have sort of disengaged from spirituality and certainly from the church. The sheer magnitude, I've read numbers, Terry, that have the nuns and the duns at about 50% of the American population. Does that correspond to what?
No, here's what I've heard. And over a decade ago, I remember it was the summer that Barack Obama announced he was going to run for president. So that gives me a kind of a timestamp. Another sociologist, another very important thinker named John C. Green, one of the authors of a new book called Secular Surge, The New Fault Line in American Politics. John C. Green was one of the first people to start studying what became known as the religious right and everything else. Anyway, John was working with the Pew Forum on religious life and thought. He was working with Pew Forum on what would become the survey that created the term nun. Now, this was about 4 to 5 years later that this actually came out. But he had some of the preliminary data. And what he charted that day at the Washington Journalism Center, what he charted on a board for us, I think is still the basic structure of America as we currently know it. And basically, George Gallup had been testing this for years. The number of people who take their religion very seriously, and as George Gallup used to stress, and it affects their daily life, that percentage of Americans is somewhere around 28 to 31%. Now, what's interesting is that number isn't changing all that much. You go to the other side, and the small number of atheists and agnostics who have always been in the neighborhood of 3 to 4% of Americans, that's now risen to like 7. Then when you throw in the nothing in particulars in all of their different forms, they're now up to about 30 to 32% of the population, almost exactly the same size as the religiously committed. What's shrinking is the middle. And so many parts of American life, the middle is vanishing. And the middle of American religion is what I have always called Oprah America. And it's basically whatever form of religion works on Oprah. And it's this kind of Sheilaism. It's kind of make up your own mind, don't be judgmental and whatever. That's actually the part of American life that's fading away, is the people who are sort of Baptist, sort of Catholic, sort of this, what in the South we would call cultural Baptists, or what sociologists would call cultural Catholics. And in the context of Orthodoxy, frequently these are people that a priest would say they're ethnically Orthodox. They consider themselves Orthodox not because they've been to confession anytime in the last decade or two, but because they were raised Orthodox, they identify with an Orthodox culture, and maybe they go to Pascha, maybe they still have weddings in the church, but they're only culturally identified with the faith. And this is a part of Orthodoxy. This is a part of the struggle here in America to kind of get beyond cultural orthodoxy to a more enthusiastic, truly Orthodox expression of the faith.
Yeah, I want to talk about some of the opportunities this presents. And when I was giving that figure of about 50%, I was looking at surveys that said 23% of the American population has abandoned religion. And then 25% of the population has given up on the church. So a way of talking about nones and dones. And my thought is whatever the percentage is, if only 1% of the nones and the dones were to convert to Eastern Orthodoxy, that would triple the number of Orthodox Christians in the US. And I see more and more people coming into the Orthodox Church. And I want to talk about that for a moment, because you have two issues going on side by side. Overall, collectively, my research shows me that the Orthodox Church is growing. It's actually growing in America and it's growing worldwide. But if you break that down, you can look at two constituencies, one cradle Orthodox. And a sad reality seems to be, and I'm wondering what your opinion on this would be, Terry, but it seems to me that many cradle Orthodox are walking away from the faith. On the other hand, Orthodoxy is growing because there are a lot of people who are converting to Orthodoxy. And I actually asked one of my research assistants to come up with a whole stack of testimonies that have just been sent to me at the Christian Research Institute since I became Orthodox. And it's so many testimonies of people coming into the Orthodox faith. So on the one hand, there are cradle Orthodox who are walking away from the faith, probably unaware of the treasure chest in which they're enveloped. And then there are a lot of converts who are coming into Orthodoxy. They've sort of shied away from Western theology, but they're intrigued by Eastern theology, by liturgy and by tradition and by icons and by the art and by the mysticism that's part and parcel of Orthodoxy.
I looked at some recent charts, and let me give you a slightly different spin on that. I was reading some reports from, I believe it was 2018. So we were looking pre-COVID, and it showed several jurisdictions in decline, primarily Greek Orthodoxy. And then it showed the Antiochian Archdiocese and the Orthodox Church in America as being kind of level. But when I look at that as a reporter, one of the things I noticed is that the OCA and the Antiochians, who have the most enthusiastic missions and evangelism departments, of course, they are going sideways level, but the number of parishes is going up. So what that tells me is that they have parishes that are in decline, but they have others that are rising, and are rising perhaps quickly. Now, as a convert to Orthodoxy, I've been a part of parishes of that kind. My spiritual father, when I came into Orthodoxy, is the late Father Gordon Walker, who you probably know that name from the Evangelical Orthodox.
And I know his brother.
And then we went, my wife and I, early, we became Orthodox in the context of East Tennessee, which is not easy. We had to start a mission in order to join it. But then we moved to a very well-known Orthodox church. And of course, the minute I say the name, you'll smile because we both know these people well. We joined Holy Cross Orthodox Church in Linthicum, Maryland, with Father Gregory Matthews Green and his wife, Frederica Matthews Green. So dear friends of mine, and they already were at that time, and we were a part of Holy Cross for 12 years when you put it all together. And now we're in East Tennessee. We go to St. Anne, a parish that was founded by my godfather. My parents, my family's godparents are Father Stephen Freeman, J. Stephen Freeman, a well-known podcaster and blogger and writer, and his wife, Mother Beth. And so I got connected. I guess we could put a timeline in here in just a moment, but I got connected with some of the people who are at the very forefront of this growth era in Orthodoxy. So Gordon Walker, Frederica Matthews Green, J. Stephen Freeman, Father Gregory Matthews Green. I mean, these are people that have built these kinds of parishes. I believe Holy Cross, in its 20-something years of existence, I believe in one way or another, it has produced about 10 priests, which is just amazing. I mean, here in Oak Ridge, the catechumenate that was interrupted by COVID, we had 18 people, we had 18 catechumens when COVID hit. And all of them in one form or another have found their way into the church. I think during COVID, we have gained like another 9 or 10 catechumens. And this is at a church that probably has in Sunday morning attendance about 125, 130 people. So this is a church that I would say is 75 to 80% converts. And then with some Russians and Romanians thrown in there as well. And by the way, a term that I'm more comfortable with to describe some of them, we have converts, and then we have people that I call reverts.
Yeah.
And these are people that have either to one degree or another strayed away from Orthodoxy, but have come back and are enthusiastic members. I mean, we have a couple that's just joined our church with their children, and he grew up Coptic Orthodox. He's Egyptian. His wife is an American. And she's now a catechumen to join him in Orthodoxy. But she had never wanted to join Orthodoxy because she never felt she had found a church that was very friendly or outgoing and gave it some sense that it wanted her to be a part of it. Well, man, they were at our church 2 weeks, and she came forward immediately and said, you know, sign me up. You know, I want to be in the catechumen here.
You know,
And-
Terry, another kind of interesting phenomenon, and I think one that we should take note of, and perhaps you can elaborate on, but it seems to me that the more that a religious tradition conforms to the culture, the more likely people are to walk away from that
Yes.
religious tradition.
I agree. I did a talk for the Antiochian Archdiocese over a decade ago called What Do the Converts Want? And at the heart of that talk were two different definitions of an important sociological term, assimilation. And of course, America is all about assimilation. When people come here from other cultures, we want them to assimilate into American culture, you know, at the level of education and language, etc. Well, I think when you talk about assimilation among the Orthodox, who are often very proud of their ethnic traditions, and with good reason, I would stress, with good cause, there's two different ways you can assimilate. You can assimilate at the level of culture, language, music, food, you know, I mean, all the cultural layers of that ethnic identity. Or you can assimilate at the level of doctrine, which is fasting. Are you actually active in your church on a regular basis? Are you going to confession? Are you a part of the full sacramental life of your church? And what's happened here in America with some Orthodox, they've assimilated at the level of doctrine. I mean, I've had Greek Orthodox priests tell me that there's no one in their congregation who's been to confession maybe in 20 years or 25 years. And you walk in their homes and there are no icons, but yet they're very important that their children need to speak the language of the old country, whereas they're enthusiastically Greek or Russian or Romanian, Palestinian or whatever. But when it comes to their church, they kind of want to be Americans. They want their church to not be all that radically different. And so, and I've been a part of one predominantly ethnic parish of this kind. They may not participate in worship very much. They tend to sit in the pew, and yes, they have pews because that's American. And they're not as active, and their children have usually wandered away from the faith. And those are the parishes that are declining and are not attracting new members.
I mean, this is really, Terry, what I was talking about with respect to cradle Orthodox walking away from the faith. That they don't see
some cradle Orthodox, some. I think it's important to always attach the word some, because it can sound like we're blaming ethnic Orthodoxy.
Yeah,
We're not. I know totally on fire people
yeah,
coming out of ethnic backgrounds and
absolutely.
ethnic parishes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I'm talking about though is if, in tangent with what you're just saying, if kids don't see Orthodoxy lived out, sacramental Orthodoxy, as you just defined it, lived out within the context of the family, in the home,
yes,
they're likely to walk away from the faith.
Yeah. Father Gordon Walker had a great phrase for this. If I heard him say it once, I heard him say it a million times. God has no grandchildren. God only has children. You either have a relationship with him yourself. You can't get by on a second-hand relationship. The next generation has to form its own relationship with Christ and its own active practice and embrace of the faith. If not, it's not going to stand the test of time, nor will it stand this powerful level of assimilation in American culture that for me has become symbolized by the internet, entertainment culture, political culture, smartphone culture, and all the issues that come attached to that, especially in the lives of young people.
I'd be interested in your take on the fact that, at least from my perspective, my own research shows that there are a lot of nuns and duns that are attracted to Eastern Orthodoxy where they wouldn't be attracted to Western Christianity. And it is because in Western Christianity, there's a rationalism that oftentimes turns them off, whereas in Eastern Orthodox, there's the mystery, the mysteries, as we talk about, but also the mysticism and the spiritual disciplines. All that is part and parcel of the sacramental life that you alluded to earlier, seems to be an attractive aspect to the Eastern Orthodox Church. And if I read the testimonies that I was talking about earlier, so much of that is communicated in one testimony after another.
I think you're right and wrong. And let me explain why. When you dig down into the nun phenomena, and this goes back to the original studies, and I've been in touch with John C. Green, about this through the years. What makes someone a nun? What if you were looking for the beliefs that unite them? The studies at Pew Forum and elsewhere point overwhelmingly the single most common connector between people who've given up on religion, walked away from the church, is a complete rejection of the sexual morality of traditional religion and Christianity. More than anything else, it is their rejection of the church's moral teachings that has driven them away. And the belief that they're seeing the church be hypocritical about those things, not really live out their teachings, so they get to wave that deadly banner of hypocrisy with good cause, and they walk away. So that's why I think, to some degree, it's very important for you to say some people are coming to seek orthodoxy out of the nuns and the duns. But the vast majority of them, they're going to face in orthodoxy a very traditional form of moral theology. And if they're in a parish where the faith is being preached and confession is being preached and the whole sacramental life of the church is being preached, You can't run away from the fact that there's a reason it's called orthodoxy. Okay? They're going to confront traditional Christianity in the Orthodox Church. Now, at the same time, I agree with you that there are a lot of people walking through our doors right now looking for something. And frankly, a lot of them, in my experience, are people who have been broken by the sexual revolution and by a lot of the loneliness and pain and anxiety of recent years. And to some degree, they've given up trying to go in that culture by themselves. And they are looking for community, and they're looking for something real. And more than anything else, Orthodox people, our priests and our lay people, need to be very comfortable with the words come and see, or even better, oh, taste and see. Orthodoxy is not, you can't read your way to orthodoxy and become a convert. At some point, you have to be involved in worship. You have to kind of get on the escalator and ride that thing for a while and see what the life is like and see what it's like to live it. And quite frankly, a lot of these converts come to orthodoxy and accept it, choose it, and live it out. Some of them see the reality that is orthodoxy and they run away. There are a lot of converts who are there for 3 or 4 years, then they're gone. And that's a natural phenomena in religion as a whole, of course. You knew that in born again culture. How many people walked the aisle, got born again, and then 5 years later, the realities of life pulled them away. The same thing can happen in orthodoxy. Let me give you another one of my favorite images from my late spiritual father, Gordon Walker. He was preaching at Holy Cross, and he talked about back when he was a Southern Baptist and a Campus Crusade evangelist. He said he was preaching a revival in a small town in Alabama. And Father Gordon Walker had a thick Southern accent that you could pour over pancakes. I mean, it was a 5-star Southern accent, a Southerner, and archpriest. But he said, and in most Southern towns, there's at least 1 or 2 notorious sinners who show up at revivals and they've walked the aisle over and over and over, throughout their life. And he said, so at the end of an altar call, he said, this guy came down and threw himself at my feet and said, preacher, I done broke all of the 10 commandments except one. And the only reason I didn't break that one is the man I shot didn't die. But our parish, of course, we all cracked up laughing at, it's a wonderful Father Gordon story. But then this was the Orthodox twist. He pivoted and pointed toward the altar. And he said, God knows that some of us need to go to confession more than others. He said, the key is to keep walking toward the altar. Walk toward the altar and walk toward the altar again and walk toward the altar again and walk toward the altar again. That's the essence of the Orthodox life. And he's referring both to going to confession, standing before Christ Pantocrator and saying confession. And he's also talking about communion, of course. Yeah. He's talking about the full gospel as expressed in repentance and forgiveness and in the sacraments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if you've got a church that's willing to say that with enthusiasm and belief, and their people are living it out, you are going to find some people come through the door and want to stay. And unfortunately, you'll find a few others who see that and are scared and will leave.
Noel, I'm sure there are probably a lot of people that want to talk to Terry, so break in whenever you want. I am also very interested in hearing Terry's testimony, how he came into Orthodoxy. I think that'd be exceedingly interesting. But again, break in anytime you want, Noel. This is your gig. If you have some really important questions, that'll certainly be more important than any questions I'm asking.
Well, I'll just put in there's a lot of good comments in the chat, but I'll just put in, someone pointed out that there are a lot of Orthodox churches where language is an issue. And do we think that that has an effect on people's experience?
That's a great question, Terry. I mean, what is the language barrier from your perspective?
Well, I am an enthusiast, coming out of the Antiochian church background in particular, I'm an enthusiastic advocate of pan-Orthodox worship, that we need worship services that accept music and traditions out of the whole Orthodox spectrum. But I do believe the majority of the service in this context should be in English, obviously. But to me, the most important thing is music. The people who walk in the doors of Orthodox churches, especially those who are coming from the world of Protestantism or now Catholicism, they're going to want to take part in worship. And I think they need to see that they are a part of a worshiping community, not people who are simply standing there in silence. They're going to judge that church by whether or not they see the worship life of the church being enthusiastic, joyous, and beautiful. So I think it's very important for Orthodox parishes to have at least 50 to 60% of the service that's in music that the congregation sings as well, and sings with enthusiasm.
And remembers during the entirety of their week as a result of it. Anything else, Noel?
Someone mentioned the film by Nathan Jacobs, Becoming Truly Human, which deals with the issue of the nuns and nuns as well. And I'll just point out that we actually have a past program with Christina Hanegraaff, who interviewed Jacobs, and I'll put that link in the chat as well. It's a very good interview, but definitely if you haven't seen that film, I'd recommend checking it out.
And I would recommend the book I held up earlier, Ryan Berg's The Nuns, where they came from, who they are, and where they're going. And you don't need to theologically agree with Ryan on everything to get a lot out of this book. And I would urge our priests and our Christian educators and others to pay attention to some of the stuff that's in this book.
Terry, what about your own conversion, your own entrance into Orthodoxy?
Well, as I've mentioned, let me connect some dots I've already given. I grew up Southern Baptist in a wonderful Southern Baptist home. Much like Father Gordon Walker, I have nothing negative to say about my upbringing as a Southern Baptist. My parents were wonderful people. My brother is one of the Southern Baptist Convention's best known youth leaders. My sister is very active in various ministries of the church and married to a Southern Baptist minister. I grew up Southern Baptist. I went to Baylor. I think music had a lot to do with me beginning to look away from kind of rock band and drum kit contemporary music. As much as I like that form of music in terms of rock music and jazz and whatever, that was never church music to me. And so I, like many other people, I was also reading C.S. Lewis, and a whole lot of other authors. And you also need to understand, I studied a lot of church history in both my undergraduate and graduate degrees. So I knew a little bit about Orthodoxy, and I knew a lot about Roman Catholicism. And like many people, I went through the Anglican tradition for about a decade and came out. And during that period of time, I met lots of other Anglicans who were on the same road as I was. And that would obviously be Father Gregory and Frederica Matthews Green, J. Stephen Freeman, Father Chad Hatfield, the head of St. Vladimir's Seminary, was an Anglican priest that I met in Denver. By the way, I also met Father Christopher Metropulos in Denver. He was dean of the Greek Cathedral at that time in Denver. So I began meeting some people, and as I began to realize that Anglicanism was not an answer in a conflicted age, this whole idea that we could be united not by doctrine, but by words of worship that we don't really try to define, I began to realize that this wasn't where I wanted my family. But you could see I had already made the contacts that were going to lead me toward Orthodoxy. At that stage, I already knew Frederica Matthews Green, was in email with her constantly. A young man that entered our lives at that time who was a Catholic at the moment, Rod Dreher, was a friend during those years already. And I met Father J. Stephen Freeman and spoke at a national Episcopal conference that was based on a paper that he wrote. And when I got to East Tennessee, there he was just down the road in Oak Ridge. And I followed his move out of the Episcopal Church and into Orthodoxy, and creating the parish that I'm now a member of. And several other friends were on that same highway. When people ask me, how did you become Orthodox? I say, do you want the 30-second version, the 3-minute version, or the 30-minute version? And I think to sum all that up, the 30-second version is I was looking for a beautiful, solid, traditional expression of Christianity, yet not one that was caught up in the whole wars in American culture over fundamentalism and evangelicalism and all of that. I wanted to go back to the trunk of the tree. And
yeah, you want to go back to when the church was young.
And with the help of especially Father Gordon Walker, who became our family's spiritual father, I found my way into Orthodoxy.
His brother goes to St. Nectarius, the church I go to, and he was diagnosed with stage 4 mantle cell lymphoma just as I was. And so when I received my diagnosis, he was one of the first people to reach out to me, and he's been a comfort to me ever since. I do want to end this broadcast on the note of bringing people into the Orthodox Church. I have 12 children. Many of my children, although not all of them, have become Orthodox, and that on their own. And they're bringing people into the church on a continuous basis. And I often think that if you just look at the sheer numbers, it would intoxicate us with respect to the possibilities. So if we think of the reality that there are somewhere between 250 and 300 million Orthodox people in the world, just think if just a small percentage of those, let's say 10% of those people would bring someone into the fullness of Orthodoxy in 1 year, the numbers would swell dramatically. So if you think about 10% of, let's say, a low figure, 250 million Orthodox people, that would be bringing 25 million more people into Orthodoxy in a year's time. And if you extrapolate that out from the standpoint of the principle of spiritual multiplication, in less than 7 years, you'd be evangelizing everyone. Now, there's a lot of problems with that illustration, but it just gives you some kind of an idea of what the possibilities are. If just 1% of the Orthodox people would bring one person in the fullness of Orthodoxy every year through the power of the Holy Spirit, by his grace, we could reach the world in a short period of time. And I think this is, as I started saying at the outset of the broadcast, this is an Orthodox moment. This is an opportunity for us to do what was done in the first century, to do it in the 21st century. And this is a transformational reality. It was for Terry. It is for me. It is for my children. When we partake of the real presence of Christ week by week, we're transformed by a power that's in us but not of us. And then we have the dunamis, the dynamite by which we can transform the world. So I want to leave this discussion with at least tantalizing you with the possibilities an Orthodox Christian We're changing the world in our lifetime. I do have one more question for Terry, and that has to do with, I was just reading a book, Terry, before I came onto the broadcast, and that is a book titled Apathyism. The whole problem of people being apathetic. And that's related to what I just said with respect to what His All Holiness talked about when he said that orthodoxy is not just for us, it is for the world. We have to continue to bring new people into it and continue to expand orthodoxy because of its influence on culture, its influence on the world, and obviously the transformation it produces in our own lives. But in terms of apathyism, the secularism of our culture, the affluenza, as I like to call it, the affluence of our culture, something that you've raised a couple of times on this broadcast, technology, all of that is causing many people to become apathetic.
Well, they're also damaged in many ways. So I would ask our listeners tonight to think about this. When someone walks in the door of your parish, what happens? Are they greeted warmly? Are they greeted with enthusiasm? Is there someone who volunteers to stand by their side during the service and help them sing through the service? Are people all over them talking to them at coffee hour, making sure they feel welcome? Is someone inviting them out to dinner? If it's a single young adult, are there other young adults who circle them and try to help them know that there's a community there that wants to know them soon? Now that may scare a few people, but in the anxious, lonely culture we live in today, it's going to be warmly received by more. And then you tell them over and over, orthodoxy is not something that you're going to get a handle on in a week or two. Come and see. Come.
Or as you said, come and taste.
Come taste and, well, they can't, well, they're going to be catechumens at first. So come and see. Father Stephen Freeman said if someone walked in the door and he could tell they were really serious about the faith, he said if they could sing, he put them straight into the choir. And he did that because they were going to sing their way through the whole Bible in about a year. They were going to hear the whole doctrine of the church go past them in the prayers and the chants and everything else. So let me leave our people with this thought. When people walk through the door, what happens? Are you ready to literally help them meet the church, taste the church, and accept the church, and accept Christ through the ancient faith of Orthodox Christianity?
On behalf of everybody listening in, Terry, I want to thank you for your wit and your wisdom and for giving us a perspective on the nuns and the duns, and then how broken people can be restored within the context of the Mother Church. Noel?
Well, thank you again, Terry. And I will close us out with just a few announcements about our upcoming programs and our regular programs. So of course, Hank will be back with us next week. And you can also listen to his daily call-in show. We have the link at myocn.net under audio, and you can also go to equip.org. Lots of content on there, so definitely check out the other things that Hank is doing. And of course, you'll find him here next week. Also, again, for our website, just a reminder that you can get our calendar imported into your Google Calendar or your iPhone calendar. The calendar is on the website, and you should be able to import it using the little option at the bottom of the calendar that's on the website under programs. So some other things you can find on the website are daily articles. We have daily reflections on relevant topics, and we also have a weekly children's resource that will be available, that is available today for this Sunday. It's available every Thursday. Also, we have every Monday on Facebook Live Adult Education at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Michael Haldes. We have Facebook Live Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, The Real Deal with Father Michael Marcantoni. And any questions that we didn't get to today, you can email us at info@myocn.net. So I'll turn it over to Hank to say our goodbyes.
Yeah, again, my thanks to Terry. Certainly enlightened me, and I'm sure was extremely helpful to our audience. I thank you, Terry, as well for your stirring testimony and for your focus on the sacramental life of Orthodoxy. I'd like to close with the Lord's Prayer. Maybe we can pray it together. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Thanks for tuning in. God bless you. Look forward to seeing you next time, next week with more. Thanks, Terry.